The rain battered Seattle's streets like it had a personal grudge, and I was soaked to the bone, clutching a canvas bag of art supplies as if they were my lifeline. My name's Eli Torres, and at 24, I'm chasing a dream that feels like it's slipping through my fingers faster than the rain down my jacket. But tonight, everything changed when Jake Callahan, my best friend since high school, showed up at my door, looking like he'd been chewed up and spit out by the universe. He stood there, dripping wet, his duffel bag slung over one shoulder, his broad frame filling the doorway of my cramped Capitol Hill apartment. Jake, with his military buzz cut and that jawline that could cut glass, was the kind of guy who turned heads without trying. "Eli," he said, voice rough like he'd been shouting into the void. I got nowhere else to go. I should have asked questions why he was here, why he looked like he hadn't slept in days, why his eyes carried a storm heavier than the one outside. But I didn't. I just stepped aside and let him in. Because that's what you do for the guy who's been your rock through every heartbreak, every failed art show, every moment you thought you'd break. Jake was straight, always had been, but he was my safe harbor in a world that often felt too jagged to navigate. "Crash on the couch," I said, tossing him a towel. My apartment was a mess, paint tubes scattered across the table, half-finished canvases leaning against the walls like silent accusations. I'm a painter, or at least I'm trying to be, scraping by on freelance gigs and the occasional mural commission. Jake, though, he was the stable 1X Army, now a mechanic with a steady job, a steady life. Or so I thought. He didn't say much as he dried off, just nodded and dropped his bag by the couch. The silence between us wasn't new. We'd always had this easy rhythm, like two notes in a song that didn't need words to harmonize. But tonight, something was off. His shoulders were tense, his movements clipped, like he was carrying a secret too heavy to unpack. "You hungry?" I asked, trying to fill the quiet. I rummaged through my fridge, which was depressingly empty except for some leftover Thai takeout and a half-empty bottle of cheap wine. "Nah, I'm good," he said, but his voice cracked, betraying him. He sat on the couch, staring at the floor like it held the answers to whatever was eating him alive. I sat across from him, cross-legged on the rug, and cracked open the wine anyway. "Talk to me, man. What's going on?" He looked up, and for a second, his blue eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my chest tighten. I screwed up. "Eli," he said finally. "Everything. My job. My place. Sarah." Sarah. His girlfriend of 2 years. The one he'd talked about settling down with. I'd met her a few times, blonde, sweet, the kind of woman who seemed perfect for him. But I'd always felt a pang when he talked about her, a quiet ache I'd learned to bury deep. "What happened with Sarah?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. He ran a hand over his face, the stubble rasping against his palm. "She's gone. Found out I don't know. Not who she thought I was. Not who I thought I was." My heart stuttered, but I didn't push. Not yet. Instead, I poured him a glass of wine and slid it across the coffee table. "Drink. Then talk." He took the glass, but didn't drink. Just held it like it was an anchor. "I got fired," he said after a long pause. "Boss caught me drinking on the job. Wasn't even a lot. Just enough to take the edge off. Then Sarah walked out. Said she couldn't deal with me anymore. Said I was hiding something, even from myself." I wanted to ask what she meant, but the way his hands shook told me he wasn't ready to spill it all. Not tonight. So I did what I always did, filled the silence with something lighter. "Well, you're here now. Couch is yours as long as you need it. Just don't expect me to cook gourmet." He cracked a small smile, the first I'd seen since he showed up. "You burn toast. Eli, I'm not expecting miracles." We laughed, and for a moment, it was like old times, two kids sneaking beers behind the bleachers, dreaming of lives bigger than our small-town roots. But the air between us was heavier now, charged with something unspoken. I didn't know what it was, but it felt like a thread pulling taut, ready to snap. That night, I lay awake in my bed, listening to the rain and the faint sound of Jake shifting on the couch. I wondered what he was hiding. What had broken him enough to land here? And I wondered why my heart raced at the thought of him so close, when I'd spent years telling myself he was just a friend. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee. Jake was in my tiny kitchen, fumbling with my ancient coffee maker like it was a puzzle he couldn't solve. "You're up early," I said, rubbing sleep from my eyes. "Couldn't sleep," he muttered, pouring 2 mugs. He handed me one, his fingers brushing mine for a split second. It was nothing, but my skin burned where he'd touched me. We spent the day together, something we hadn't done in months. I dragged him to an art supply store, where he teased me about my obsession with overpriced brushes. I laughed, but my eyes kept catching on in the way his smile softened when he thought I wasn't looking, the way his presence filled every space we entered. By afternoon, we were at Pike Place Market, dodging tourists and sampling overpriced cheeses. He seemed lighter, but the shadow in his eyes never fully left. That night, we ended up back on my couch, a pizza box between us and some terrible action movie playing on my cracked TV. Jake was quieter than usual, his gaze drifting to me more than the screen. "You ever feel like you're running from something?" he asked suddenly, his voice low. I froze, a slice of pizza halfway to my mouth. "Yeah," I said carefully. "All the time." He nodded, like he'd expected that answer. Then he leaned back, his arm brushing mine, and I swear the air in the room shifted. "I don't know who I am anymore, Eli," he said, almost too quiet to hear. "But being here, it's the first time in weeks I don't feel lost." My throat tightened, and I wanted to say anything to make him feel less alone. But before I could, he closed his eyes, his head tipping back against the couch. He was asleep in minutes, his breathing slow and steady. I watched him, my heart a tangled mess of hope and fear, and wondered what the hell I was getting myself into. The next few days settled into a strange rhythm. Jake became a fixture in my apartment, his duffel bag a permanent resident by the couch, his boots lined up neatly by the door. I'd find him in the mornings, already awake, staring out my window at the Seattle skyline like it held secrets he was desperate to decode. I didn't push him to talk not yet, but the weight of his unspoken truth hung between us like a fog. I kept busy with my art, working on a mural commission for a local coffee shop. Jake tagged along one day, watching me sketch chalk outlines on the brick wall. "You're good at this," he said, his voice carrying a quiet awe that made my cheeks burn. "Always were." "You're just saying that because you're crashing rent-free," I teased. But his gaze lingered, heavy and searching, and I had to look away before I drowned in it. That night, we were back on the couch, a bottle of whiskey replacing the cheap wine. Jake was looser, the alcohol softening the edges of his tension. He told me about his time in the Army, stories he'd never shared before, about the fear, the camaraderie, the moments he thought he wouldn't make it back. I listened, my heart aching for the boy I'd known, now a man carrying scars I couldn't see. "You ever miss it?" I asked, swirling the whiskey in my glass. "Sometimes," he admitted. "It was simple. You know, follow orders, do your job. Out here, it's messy." I nodded, thinking about my own mess, years of hiding who I was, even from myself. I'd come out in college, but it hadn't been easy. Small-town Washington wasn't exactly a haven for a gay kid with dreams of painting the world. Jake had been there through it all, never judging, always steady. But now, sitting so close I could feel the warmth of his arm against mine, I wondered if I'd been blind to something all along. "Eli," he said suddenly, his voice rough, "you ever think about what you want? Like, really want?" The question caught me off guard, and I laughed to cover the way my pulse spiked. "World peace, $1 million, and a gallery show in New York," I said, but my voice wavered. He didn't laugh. Instead, he turned to face me, his knee brushing mine. "I mean it. What do you want?" I swallowed hard, the truth clawing at my throat. I wanted him had for years, if I was honest. But he was straight, and I'd buried that longing so deep I thought it was gone. Until now. "I want to be happy," I said finally, the words feeling too small for the ache in my chest. He held my gaze, and for a moment, I thought he might say something that would change everything. But then he looked away, draining his glass in one swallow. Yeah, he muttered. Me too. The next morning, I woke to find him gone. Panic hit me like a freight train. His duffel was still there, but his boots were missing. I found a note on the counter, went for a walk. Back soon. Relief flooded me, but it was tinged with unease. Jake wasn't the type to wander aimlessly, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was running from something or toward it. He came back hours later, his face flushed from the cold, his eyes brighter than they'd been in days. I got a job, he announced, tossing his jacket on the couch. Construction gig downtown. Starts tomorrow. That's great, I said, forcing a smile. I was happy for him, but the thought of him rebuilding his life made me realize how temporary this arrangement might be. What happened when he didn't need my couch anymore? That night, we celebrated with takeout from the Indian place down the street. Jake was animated, talking about the job, the crew, the chance to start over. But as the night wore on, his mood shifted. He grew quiet again, his fingers tapping restlessly against his knee. You okay? I asked, setting my plate aside. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and stared at the floor. I don't know how to do this, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Do what? He looked up, and the raw vulnerability in his eyes stole my breath. Figure out who I am, what I feel. It's all tangled. My heart pounded, but I kept my voice steady. You don't have to figure it all out tonight, Jake. Just be here. That's enough. He nodded, but the tension in his shoulders didn't ease. When we finally turned off the lights and settled in my bed, him on the couch, I couldn't sleep. The air felt charged, like the calm before a storm. I didn't know what was coming, but I knew it would change us both. The next week was a blur of routine and tension. Jake threw himself into his new job, coming home sweaty and exhausted, but with a spark in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. I kept painting, losing myself in the mural, trying to ignore the way my heart tripped every time he walked through the door. We were playing at normalcy, but the undercurrent of something unspoken grew stronger every day. One evening, I came home from the coffee shop to find Jake in my kitchen, attempting to cook. The smell of burning onions filled the air, and he was swearing under his breath, a spatula in one hand and a beer in the other. You're gonna burn the place down. I laughed, dropping my bag by the door. Shut up. He grinned, but there was a nervous edge to it. Thought I'd try something new. I raised an eyebrow, peering into the pan. Is that chili? Supposed to be, he muttered, stirring the mess. You're the artist, not me. We ate the barely edible chili on the couch, laughing at his culinary disaster. But as the night wore on, the laughter faded, replaced by that heavy silence that had become our constant companion. Jake set his bowl down and leaned back, his arms stretched along the back of the couch, his fingers inches from my shoulder. Eli, he said, his voice low and serious. Can I ask you something? My stomach twisted, but I nodded. Always. When you figured out you were gay, he said, hesitating. How did you know? Like, for sure. The question hit me like a punch. I set my bowl down, buying time. It wasn't one moment. I said finally. It was a lot of little things. Feelings I couldn't ignore, even when I tried. People I couldn't stop thinking about. I didn't say you, but it hung in the air anyway. He nodded, his jaw tight. And when you told people, was it hard? Yeah, I admitted. Scariest thing I've ever done. But it was like taking a weight off my chest. I could finally breathe. He didn't say anything for a long time, just stared at the TV, which was muted now. Then, so quietly I almost missed it, he said, I think I'm scared to breathe. My heart stopped. I wanted to reach for him, to pull him close and tell him it was okay, whatever he was feeling. But I didn't. Instead, I said. You don't have to do it alone. Jake. I'm here. He looked at me then, his eyes searching mine, and for a moment, I thought he might lean closer. But he didn't. He just nodded and stood, muttering something about needing a shower. I watched him go, my chest aching with the weight of what we weren't saying. The next day, I was at the coffee shop, finishing the mural. Jake showed up unexpectedly, his work boots caked in mud, a takeout coffee in his hand. Thought you might need this, he said, handing it to me. Thanks, I said, surprised. He lingered, watching me paint, and I felt his gaze like a physical touch. You don't have to babysit me. You know. Not babysitting, he said, a small smile tugging at his lips. Just like watching you work. My hand faltered on the brush, leaving a streak of blue across the wall. I laughed it off, but my heart was racing. We didn't talk much after that, but he stayed until I finished for the day, walking me home through the rain-soaked streets. It felt like we were teetering on the edge of something, and I didn't know whether to jump or pull back. That night, everything changed. I woke up to the sound of Jake moving in the living room, the couch creaking under his weight. I glanced at the clock 2 a.m. I got up, intending to check on him, but when I stepped into the living room, I froze. He was sitting on the couch, head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Jake, I said softly, crossing the room. He didn't look up, but his breathing was uneven, like he was fighting tears. I sat beside him, close enough to feel the heat of his body, but not touching. What's wrong? He shook his head, his voice muffled. I can't keep doing this. Doing what? I asked, my heart in my throat. Pretending, he said, and when he finally looked at me, his eyes were raw, red-rimmed. I'm so damn tired of pretending. Eli. I didn't know what to say, so I just reached out, my hand resting on his arm. He didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned into me, his forehead dropping to my shoulder, and I felt the weight of his pain, his confusion, his fear. I held him, my arms wrapping around him like it was the most natural thing in the world. And for the first time, I let myself hope that maybe, just maybe, he felt it too. The moment Jake leaned into me, the world seemed to stop. His breath was warm against my neck, his body heavy with exhaustion and something deeper, something that felt like surrender. I held him, my heart pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. And for those few minutes, it was just us. Two people caught in a storm we didn't fully understand. He pulled back eventually, his eyes avoiding mine. Sorry, he muttered, wiping his face with the back of his hand. Didn't mean to, you know. Don't apologize, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. You don't ever have to apologize for feeling something. He nodded, but the tension in his jaw told me he was still wrestling with whatever was tearing him apart. I wanted to push, to ask what he meant by pretending, but I knew he wasn't ready. So I stood, offering him a glass of water, and we sat in silence until he fell asleep on the couch, his breathing finally evening out. The next few days were a tightrope walk. Jake was quieter, more withdrawn, but he didn't leave. He went to work, came home, and we fell into a routine that felt both fragile and intimate. I'd catch him watching me sometimes when I was painting, when I was laughing at something stupid on my phone, and the look in his eyes made my stomach flip. It wasn't just friendship anymore. It was something more, something dangerous. One night, after a long day, we ended up at a dive bar down the street. The place was packed, all neon lights and sticky floors, but it felt like a bubble away from the world. We played pool, and Jake's competitive streak came out, his laughter loud and unguarded for the first time in weeks. I leaned against the table, watching him line up a shot, and the sight of him focused, confident, alive made my chest ache. You're staring, he said, not looking up from the cue ball. I am not. I lied, but my grin gave me away. He sank the shot and straightened, his eyes meeting mine. You're a terrible liar, Eli. We laughed, but the air between us was charged, electric. Later, as we walked home, the rain had stopped, and the city felt quiet, almost reverent. Jake's shoulder brushed mine, and neither of us pulled away. It was a small thing, but it felt like a confession. Back at the apartment, we didn't bother with the TV or the whiskey. We just sat on the couch, closer than necessary, the silence heavy with possibility. "I need to tell you something," Jake said finally, his voice low. My heart raced, but I nodded. "I'm listening." He took a deep breath, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. When Sarah left, she said I was hiding something. She was right. I've been hiding it for years, maybe my whole life. I just didn't want to see it. I held my breath, afraid to move, afraid to break whatever fragile thing was happening. "What are you hiding, Jake?" He looked at me then, his eyes raw and unguarded. "You," he said simply, and my world tilted. "It's always been you, Eli." I just didn't know how to say it. Didn't know if I could. I couldn't speak, couldn't think. All I could do was stare at him, at the man I'd loved in silence for years, now looking at me like I was the answer to a question he'd been asking forever. Before I could find words, he leaned forward, his hand cupping my face, and kissed me. It was tentative at first, like he was testing the waters, but then it deepened, and I felt the weight of every unspoken moment between us. I kissed him back, my hands tangling in his shirt, and for the first time, I let myself believe this was real. When we pulled apart, both of us were breathing hard, our foreheads pressed together. "I'm scared," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I don't know what this means." "Me neither," I admitted, my thumb brushing his cheek. "But we'll figure it out. Together." He nodded, and we sat there, wrapped in each other, the world outside fading away. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The kiss changed everything. The next morning, I woke up to Jake still on the couch. But this time, he was holding me. I don't know how it happened sometime in the night. I'd ended up beside him, his arms wrapped around me like he was afraid I'd disappear. I lay there, my head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. And for a moment, I let myself believe this could last. But reality has a way of crashing in. Jake woke up, his body tensing as he realized how close we were. He didn't pull away, but his eyes were clouded with doubt. "Eli," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "What are we doing?" I sat up, giving him space. "What do you want us to be doing?" He ran a hand over his face, his jaw tight. "I don't know. I'm not," he stopped, the words catching in his throat. "I'm not gay. At least, I didn't think I was. But you're different." My heart ached, but I kept my voice steady. "You don't have to label it, Jake. Not yet. Just tell me what you feel." He looked at me, his eyes searching mine. "I feel like I've been running my whole life, and you're the only thing that makes me want to stop." I reached for his hand, lacing our fingers together. "Then stop. Stay?" He nodded, but the fear in his eyes didn't fade. We didn't talk about it again that day, but the air between us was different, charged with possibility, but also with uncertainty. Jake went to work, and I threw myself into my painting, trying to capture the chaos of my emotions on canvas. The mural was almost done, a riot of color and movement, but it felt incomplete, like it was missing something vital. That night, Jake came home with a bottle of wine and a nervous smile. "Thought we could try this again," he said, holding up the bottle. "No whiskey this time." We drank. We talked. We laughed. But the tension was still there, simmering beneath the surface. When he kissed me again, it was slower, more deliberate, like he was memorizing every moment. I melted into him, my hands roaming his back, feeling the strength and vulnerability beneath his skin. But the next day, the cracks started to show. Jake was distant, his smiles forced. I caught him staring at his phone, his thumb hovering over Sarah's contact. "You miss her?" I asked, trying to keep the jealousy out of my voice. He sighed, setting the phone down. "It's not about missing her. It's about wondering if I'm screwing this up too." "You're not screwing anything up," I said, but the words felt hollow. I wanted to believe them, but the doubt in his eyes mirrored my own. Over the next few days, we danced around the truth. We kissed. We touched. We held each other. But there was always a moment where Jake would pull back, his fear winning out. I tried to be patient, to give him space, but it hurt. Every time he retreated, it felt like a piece of my heart was breaking. One night, after a particularly quiet dinner, he finally spoke. "I need to figure this out, Eli," he said, his voice raw. "I can't keep doing this halfway. It's not fair to you." I nodded, my throat tight. "What do you need?" "Time," he said simply. "And maybe space." The word hit like a blow, but I forced a smile. "Take what you need. I'm not going anywhere." He left the next morning, his duffel bag over his shoulder, promising to call. I watched him go, my heart heavy with the fear that I'd just lost him for good. The apartment felt empty without Jake. His boots were gone, the couch too neat, the air too quiet. I threw myself into my work, finishing the mural with a ferocity that surprised even me. The coffee shop owner loved it, and for the first time in months, I felt a spark of pride. But it wasn't enough to fill the hole Jake had left. He called a few times, his voice strained but warm. He'd found a cheap motel room, was still working the construction job, but he didn't say much about us. I didn't push, but every conversation ended with a hollow ache in my chest. One night, I went to the bar alone, hoping to drown my thoughts in cheap beer. Instead, I ran into Sarah. She was there with friends, her blonde hair catching the neon light. She spotted me and waved me over, her smile hesitant but kind. "Eli," she said, pulling me into a hug. "How's Jake?" I didn't know how to answer. "He's figuring things out," I said finally. She nodded, her eyes softening. "He's a good guy? Just lost. I hope he finds what he's looking for." I wanted to ask what she meant, what she'd seen in him that I hadn't, but I didn't. Instead, I bought her a drink, and we talked about nothing: music, the weather, the city. But her words stuck with me, a reminder that Jake's journey wasn't just about me. A week later, he showed up at my door again. It was late, the rain pounding outside, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the storm. I stepped aside, my heart racing. He dropped his bag and stood there, dripping wet, his eyes locked on mine. "I'm sorry," he said, "for leaving, for everything." "You don't have to be sorry," I said, but my voice cracked. "Just tell me what you want." He took a step closer, his hand reaching for mine. "You," he said, his voice steady now. "I want you, Eli. I'm done running." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so I did both, pulling him into a hug that felt like coming home. We stood there, soaked and shivering, but neither of us cared. For the first time, it felt like we were on the same page. The next few days were a whirlwind. Jake moved back in, this time not just crashing on the couch. We really talked about his fears, his confusion, his hopes. He told me about the years he'd spent denying parts of himself, the pressure to be the man everyone expected. I told him about my own struggles, the loneliness of loving someone who might never love me back. We were careful, taking it slow, but every touch, every glance, felt like a promise. One night, as we lay tangled together on the couch, he whispered, "I don't know what I am, Eli, but I know I love you." I kissed him, my heart full, and for the first time, I believed we could make this work. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance. Jake and I were building something new, something fragile but beautiful. We didn't have all the answer shell. We barely had half of them, but we were trying. And for the first time in my life, trying felt like enough. I finished the mural, and the coffee shop threw a small opening party to celebrate. Jake was there, standing in the crowd, his smile brighter than the neon signs outside. When the owner toasted to my work, Jake raised his glass, his eyes never leaving mine. I felt seen, not just as an artist, but as a persona, as his person. But life isn't a fairy tale, and our story wasn't without its challenges. Jake still struggled with his identity, with the weight of a world that demanded labels and certainty. There were nights when he'd pull away, lost in his thoughts, and I'd lie awake, wondering if I was enough to keep him here. One evening, we walked along the waterfront, the city lights reflecting on the water. Jake stopped, his hands in his pockets, and looked out at the horizon. "I talked to Sarah today," he said, his voice calm but heavy. My stomach dropped, but I nodded. "How'd that go?" "She's happy," he said, moving on. "Said she always knew I was searching for something she couldn't give me." He turned to me, his eyes soft. "She was right. It was you." I reached for his hand, my throat tight. "You don't have to have it all figured out, Jake. We're doing this together. Remember?" He smiled, pulling me close. "Yeah, together." That night, we went back to the apartment, and for the first time, Jake didn't sleep on the couch. We lay in my bed, his arms around me, his breath warm against my neck. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but it was ours. And as I drifted off, I realized that love isn't about having all the answers. It's about showing up, even when you're scared, and choosing each other every day. The next morning, I woke to find Jake watching me, his expression soft and certain. "What?" I asked, my voice thick with sleep. "Just thinking," he said, his hand brushing my cheek. "About how I ended up here, holding you like I've dreamed of it forever." I laughed, my heart full. "You're such a sap." "Only for you," he said, and kissed me. Our story didn't end there. Life doesn't work that way. There were still struggles, still questions, still moments of doubt. But we faced them together. Two imperfect people building a life out of love and courage. And in the end, that was enough.